Let us pray. From our forests and parkland to our prairies and mountains comes the call of our land. From our farmsteads, towns, and cities comes the call of our people. But as legislators of this province, we act with responsibility and sensitivity. Lord, grant us the wisdom to meet such challenges. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 35, the Business Corporations Amendment Act 1987. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to provide for certain amendments to the Business Corporations Act in the light of actual experience with the Act since its inception in 1981.
The Honourable Member for Calgary North Hill has moved first reading to Bill number 35, Business Corporations Amendment Act 1987. All those in favor of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill 35, being Business Corporations Amendment Act 1987, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Stewart, is now read a first time.
Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 37, the Wild Rose Foundation Amendment Act 1987. Mr. Speaker, this amendment will change the Wild Rose Foundation Act to more adequately represent its original intent.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South has moved for first reading Bill number 37, Wild Rose Foundation Amendment Act 1987. Those wishing to give first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill 37, Wild Rose Foundation Amendment Act 1987, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Oldring, is now read a first time.
Speaker, I move that Bill 35 and 37 be placed on the order paper under Government Bills and Orders.
Having heard the motion by the Deputy Government House Leader, those in favour please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Member for Calgary Glenmore, followed by the member for Cardston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've already had the opportunity of meeting this fine young group of students from Calgary Glenmore, but through you I'd like to introduce them to members of this assembly. 111 students, grade 5s and 6s from the Eugene Cross School. They're currently studying government at all levels. Accompanying them are 5 teachers and 8 parents. Teachers are Mrs. Dunfield, Mrs. Hanson, Mrs. Hoffman, Assistant Principal Mr. Clapson, and Mr. Prince, and the parents, Mrs. Bearer, Mrs. Boyd, Mrs. Daw, Mrs. Folks, Mrs. Findley, Mrs. Cowles, Mr. Bronworth, and Mrs. Forrester, and they're seated in the members and public gallery. And could they please rise to receive the warm welcome from this assembly?
Member for Cardston.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to introduce to you and to the Assembly today 28 students, grades 7 through 9 from the Mountain View School, which is about 350 miles from here and located not far from Waterton Park. They're accompanied by 3 teachers, Mr. Noel Pilling, Mr. George Toon, and Miss Lana Cook, and 1 parent, Mrs. Karen Toon. I'd like to have them stand and have them receive the warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister made some gratuitous comments to the fact that workers receive what they are entitled to, not more and certainly no less from the Workers' Compensation Board. Mr. Speaker, if this were the truth, why would the Minister write to the Board ordering them to reduce their cost per claim and average compensation claims per day? The Minister can't have it both ways.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what concerned this government was the fact that claims costs were rising in 1 year at a rate of 20%, when in fact the numbers of claims were not rising at all. And that struck us as very unusual and struck us with some concern, and we asked the Board to take action on it.
Well, supplementary question. My question to the Minister is when he goes back, will he explain what he means then, that they're entitled to not more, certainly not less? Is the Minister saying then that clearly he as a Minister, in all his wisdom, understood that people were getting too much before, in the years before? Is that what he's saying?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that it does not make sense that claims costs would be rising by 20%, numbers of claims would be not rising at all, and that the severity of the injuries that were happening in the workplace were not in any way related to a 20% increase in their cost of claims.
That's very, Minister has great wisdom. He comes to these conclusions and says, I know what to do, cut them off. But my question is, it's interesting the Minister does not deny that the WCB was ordered to pull every file in January to meet the Minister's directive, and hundreds of people were cut off with virtually no notice. How can the Minister claim that the WCB is being administered fairly when people are cut off arbitrarily following a political decision by this Minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly appreciate the honourable member's comments on wisdom. I'll take that and store it away for those low days. But Mr. Speaker, what I can say is that I have a responsibility, just as the honourable member has the right and the responsibility to ask me questions in this assembly. I then also have the responsibility as the minister responsible for the Workers' Compensation Board to provide them with policy direction on behalf of all of my government colleagues. We were concerned, Mr. Speaker, about the numbers, the dollar volume related to claims, the low rise in the number of claims, and we asked the Board to look at it very seriously and take appropriate action.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe the Minister should have been more concerned about the injured workers.
Yeah.
That would have been his responsibility.
Good start, Jim.
But we noticed, Mr. Speaker, that the number of appeal cases have been doubling every month since January as a result of this reign of terror by the Minister. And clearly one way to save money is to cut everybody off and then tell them to get reinstated through appeal. But my question to the Minister is, what action has the Minister taken to reduce the incredible amount of appeal cases that's been generated that keeps going up longer and longer and longer? What's the Minister doing about that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that, as my colleague, the Minister of Social Services, has said so many times, it's wrong for the honourable member and his colleagues to suggest that they have the corner on caring in this assembly, because this government cares very deeply about workers in Alberta. And to that end, Mr. Speaker, we have been very diligent in our attempts in the Occupational Health and Safety Division to undertake a major blitz in the oil patch, a major inspection approach in auto body shops where we're concerned about isocyanates and their disastrous effect on workers if they're not properly protected. Our effects in the hydrogen sulfide area, our efforts in the hydrogen sulfide area, and in many other areas of safety and inspection to make sure that safety is number one in the workplace.
Second main question, the opposition, Westlock Surgeon, supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Community Health. Before the Minister gave his order to this independent board, supposedly, did he think at all that, or did he consider the possibility that the 20% increase in claims was due to the poor monitoring of his department of the workplace and the resultant increase in severity of the accidents?
Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, the second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton-Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, today would like to direct my questions to the Minister responsible for the Autonomous Insurance Corporation with the Heart. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, in response to the Leader of the Official Opposition's question on contract between the Workers' Compensation Board and the consulting firm of Kellogg, Stevenson, Ernst & Winnie, the Minister did not provide the Assembly with the amount of the management's cost or who would be paying for it. Can the Minister today advise the Assembly what that amount will be and who, in fact, will be paying for the cost of the consultant's report?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in our efforts to bring some better, improved management systems and approach to this $1.5 billion insurance corporation, yes, one with a heart and one that cares, but not a social service agency, we feel that it would be appropriate within the administration area of the Workers' Compensation Board for that administration to pay in the order of an estimated $150,000 for a comprehensive consultant's report to help us improve the management and operation of the board.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's somewhat higher than what I thought it would be. In fact, I'd like to file for the information of the Assembly 3 copies of a letter from the consultant, Kellogg, Stevenson, Ernst & Winnie, to the chairman.
Order, please, honourable member. We have another place for tablings and so forth, but if you're going to table it, and let's go on to the supplementary, please.
Anyhow, in this, it indicates that there is a $25,000 amount, which I could expect could grow. However, can the Minister advise the Assembly why the terms of the reference in the consultant's input is limited to directing the Workers' Compensation Board only to do a directional plan? Thus, the large bulk of the work is being done by the Board, and all that's happening is that the consultants are going to put it on their letterhead.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am not quite clear as to what the problem the honourable member has. Does he agree that the Workers' Compensation Board is operating in an adequate fashion today? If he does, let him stand up and say so. I have said in the letter that that is not a private document, never has been. Happy, thank you to the Leader of the Opposition for making it public in this Assembly. I have said I am not satisfied with the operation of the Board. I have called in some experts. We, the Board, have called in some experts to help us come to grips with the problems there and to turn the situation around and make it a better place and a better operating place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that Mr. Ken Cool, the Executive Director of Finance, Doug Clough, the Executive Assistant to the Board, Milt Webster, the Director of Personnel, and a Mr. Bill McDonald, Manager of Claims Information and Counseling, have been seconded to this management review, and that up to an additional 50 other board employees will be working on this project so that the real cost isn't the $150,000 that the Minister indicated, but closer to perhaps a full $500,000 for this report.
No, Mr. Speaker.
My final supplementary then, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister today, in light of the fact that board employees will be clearly doing most of the required work, dismiss the consulting firm in favor of establishing a select committee of MLAs to conduct public hearings so that employers, workers, and especially injured workers would have the opportunity to let us know just what needs to be done by the board?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member still hasn't answered my question to him because he doesn't have the courage to stand up and say how he feels about the board. I am concerned. I have said to him, I have said to all honourable members, Mr. Speaker, that I am concerned about the board and the way it is operating. I want to improve it. If the member is against efficiency and an improved system, let him stand up and say so. What I can confirm, Mr. Speaker, is that a number of individuals, including the ones that the honourable member listed, have met with and will be able to meet with in the days ahead representatives of the likes of the Alberta Federation of Labour, the Canadian Petroleum Association, and other representative groups, so that all of those who are affected by the board have their say in how it's going to be run.
Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the fact that the Workers' Compensation Board's total funding comes from assessments levied against Alberta employers, both large and small, across the province, I wonder if the minister could advise the Assembly what representations, if any, he has had from these employers, both large and small, as to the need for this kind of third-party objective review of the board's operations.
Well, Mr. Speaker, those employers share my concern, share this government's concern about the way that the board has been operating in the last number of years. And they have encouraged me, encouraged this government to find a better way. And through this approach, we believe we will do just that.
Westlock Sturgeon. Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary, this is to the Premier. In view of the fact that this report has been commissioned, fairly with a combination of taxpayers' and employers' dollars, in view of the fact that we don't exactly know what the Commission will report, would he take it in under his advisement to make sure that the report is to him and not to the Minister, just in case the consultants advise that the Minister should be fired?
No, Mr. Speaker.
I don't know how many mistakes, Mr. Speaker, a minister has to make, but this is to the Premier. The Premier has the power now to indirectly appoint the senators, 6 senators in fact. He has now a golden opportunity to start the ball rolling at least towards one of the E's, an elected Senate. Right now, the Premier has the power to ensure that from this day forward, every new senator in Alberta could be elected. Will the Premier undertake to implement a system, Mr. Speaker, whereby Alberta senators will be elected by the people of Alberta rather than patronage appointments from the Premier's office?
Mr. Speaker, the temporary situation that we have established to put additional pressure on moving quickly to Senate reform and the type of Senate reform that we want, I hope will be for a short period of time. It would not lend itself for the kind of proposal the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party suggests.
Mr. Speaker, Aboriginal rights are supposed to be a short period of time too, but would the Minister, or would the Premier, for instance, direct his Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs when he stays home in Edmonton to look into the history of how the United States Senate, which evolved from an appointed Senate, evolved into an elected Senate, the principle of elected senators, and maybe we could adopt that here.
Mr. Speaker, that kind of research has been done.
It's been done.
Possibly then, if he's asked the Intergovernmental Affairs to check into how it should be done, could he go a step further? Because the Premier's conference, later this month, there will be a conference of the 4 Western provincial premiers. Would he take this idea of electing senators to that conference and sound out the effect from the other premiers?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, he's not very talkative today. I usually keep quiet when my wife's around too, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has stated... Mr. Speaker.
Would the member mind if I issued an invitation to your wife to come? Let's see.
Mr. Speaker, I was afraid of that. The Premier has stated that he'd like to see a Triple E advocates appointed to the Senate from Alberta. Would it not even be better to have Triple E advocates elected from Alberta?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, those people who the government of Alberta would suggest would be people who we would expect would support our views regarding Triple E Senate and, Mr. Speaker, then be able to work for a Triple E Senate from within the Senate in Senate reform. I must say, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party may be quiet when he's near his wife, but he's sure busy.
Right, member. A succinct supplementary from St. Albert.
Succinct? Succinct, Mr. Speaker? To the Premier. When he gets this temporary interim appointment right from his colleagues in Ottawa, could he perhaps tell the Assembly whether he'll consider for appointment Mr. Koziak and Mr. King, who apparently are the only Tory cabinet ministers and MLAs that were defeated in the last election that haven't obtained government employment?
Member for Little Bow, followed by the member for Red Deer South.
Speaker, I dare to tread on the Premier's ground, but my question is also to the Premier today, and it's, Michael Wilson has announced that on June the 18th that he will present his paper with regards to tax reform. In that paper, he outlines three objectives. First of all, a possible sales tax with the cooperation of the provinces. Secondly, a federal sales tax. And thirdly, the possibility of a value-added tax that comes under other names as well. Could the Premier indicate at this point in time that Alberta will strongly oppose those three initiatives being announced in a preliminary way by the federal government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, these are very much options, and it's a hypothetical situation. The Honourable Provincial Treasurer has attended a variety of meetings with the Federal Finance Minister on these matters and might well wish to add some additional response for the Leader of the Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. Could the Premier indicate whether this would be one of the items on the agenda of the Western Premiers Conference because of its potential impact on the economy, not only generally but specifically in terms of agriculture and the oil and gas industry?
Go ahead. Mr. Premier, if my timing is accurate, I believe the Western Premiers Conference will take place towards the end of May. I think it's May 28th to 29th. And as the press release properly notes, Mr. Speaker, the release of the white paper proposed by Mr. Wilson, the federal government, will take place towards June the 18th. So until we see the full impact and full discussion of the tax implications, both for the personal and corporate income tax side, together with the so-called business transfer tax side, then in fact it would be inappropriate for us to carry that discussion much further. What the Premier has indicated is, in fact, right, Mr. Speaker, there have been a variety of discussions already, as between ministers and as between officials. And I think, Mr. Speaker, moreover, I've made my point at other times in response to these questions that at this point, Alberta is seriously considering the business transfer tax, weighing the implications on all the sectors of our economy, and at this point, we have not changed our view with respect to the need for a sales tax in this province.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Premier. Could the Premier indicate in terms of the Meech Lake provisions in the accord that we have agreed upon at this time, and I'm thinking in terms of the opting out provision, allowing Alberta to overrule proposed federal changes to the tax system if they're found to be severe and have severe implications on our economy. Is there anything in that accord which could allow Alberta to opt out of a proposed federal sales tax that would have severe implications in terms of Alberta's economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the discussions that went on in Meech Lake did not deal with limiting the federal government's ability to level federal taxes. And a federal sales tax is certainly within their jurisdiction. For our part, we do not believe a sales tax is appropriate in Alberta, and therefore we will resist one in every opportunity.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Treasurer, in anticipation of these federal changes to the taxes of this country, has the Treasurer prepared, and I think he said that his department was working on papers, outlining the taxes, fees, tax expenditures, guarantees, and so on that this government has in place now, so that we'll really have at our fingertips all the details we need to launch into a reanalysis, if you like, of what our tax structure is, and hence make an enlightened response to the federal initiatives.
First, Mr. Speaker, of course, this government always works on a principle of enlightenment, and that is the game plan of which we always have followed. And I appreciate the fact that the member recognizes that, and I appreciate the fact that we will do that. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that we are analyzing, as I've indicated, all the tax changes which have been suggested. To some extent, there is some confidential information involved, and therefore it's not proper to reveal all the suggested tax changes which are coming. And that's why I will wait until the federal minister makes his paper available to see what is in fact included for public discussion. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the second part of the question, which was a two-part question, by the way, deals with other information which is provided by the government of Alberta in the normal course of the business. And, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that we are, in fact, providing the information that the member talked about, whether it's the guarantees, whether it's the tax expenditures, whether it's any other information which is needed to assess the tax policies of the current tax policy of this government. They are, in fact, available through a variety of sources. It's not proper for me now, Mr. Speaker, to list them all, but in fact, all the information that was suggested by the member has, in fact, been provided and will continue to be provided. If at all possible for us to be helpful in terms of a broader debate with respect to the question of tax changes as suggested by the member from Little Bow, then, of course, we'll look for that opportunity as well, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Cypress Radcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, supplemental to the Treasurer, has there been any input to the federal powers that be to think about the new tax in the way of a shared tax, the same way that income tax is shared, which could blunt the effect quite considerably?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I've talked on a number of occasions, just this morning, for example, to Mr. Wilson on that very point. But we have, over the past 3 or 4 months, talked about what would happen if all provinces did not agree to the so-called multi-stage tax arrangement on the federal sales tax side. And right now, the only province that has reluctance to consider that is Alberta. And we've had an opportunity here to talk about the advantages of Alberta being sales tax-free, the impact on a variety of economic initiatives which we're pursuing, and the impact on disposable income of all Albertans. As the Premier has just said, we intend to maintain that clear objective. We do not need a sales tax. But obviously the pressure upon Alberta, Mr. Speaker, comes about when in fact all other provinces want to participate in some kind of a shared federal-provincial tax arrangement on the extended sales tax, bringing together the federal sales tax and the provincial sales tax into one tax accommodation. Mr. Speaker, there are a variety of problems on that side. There are a variety of administrative changes which have to be considered, and we're in the process of doing that. The commitment which Mr. Wilson has given us, and I should say, Mr. Speaker, that he's been most cooperative over the past 3 or 4 months in providing information both to ministers and to officials, and has ensured us that there be an ample opportunity to discuss in a full way the impact of these tax changes on all Albertans and on all Canadians. But we are, Mr. Speaker, pursuing very carefully internally within Treasury the implications of all these tax changes, and in fact, at some appropriate time, we'll be able to make some report as to what our decisions are. But until we have Mr. Wilson's full paper, it's impossible for us to fully reply, except in a very general way and in a policy context, Mr. Speaker.
Cypress Radcliffe, final supplementary on this question.
Mr. Speaker, to either the Minister of Agriculture or the Provincial Treasurer, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if either ministers have said anything to the federal minister responsible for financing talking about the possibilities of an extra tax on food and especially junk food and how that would affect the potato chip industry of southern Alberta, which is very important to us.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report to the honourable member that we have made representations to the Federal Minister of Finance requesting an alteration to that taxation because it does have an impact not only on our processors but on our value-added sector.
Member for Red Deer South, followed by the member for Edmonton Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Culture. In light of recent moves to change the name of the Department of Culture and the establishment of the Institute of Multicultural Resource Development and the Multicultural Commission, Can the minister briefly indicate the purposes and intent of these changes, or is this just another example of government window dressing?
Mr. Speaker, to answer the last question first, no, it's not a matter of government window dressing. The commitment of the government to our multicultural community and to the cultural heritage of the province is underlined by these significant moves, which are in fact the first in the country. We hope by taking these innovative actions to underline for all Albertans the importance of our heritage to the province and to utilize that information and background and the arts and history that we all bring to this country from wherever we come in our way of life.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister indicate to this Assembly what opportunity has there been for, or will there be for input from the ethno-cultural organizations of this province before these new initiatives are finalized?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the changes that are taking place, the Cultural Heritage Foundation has been consulted, and we have discussed the new directions with that, as well as with the executive of the Cultural Heritage Council, which represents all of the ethno-cultural organizations in the province. We do intend over the next few months to involve as many people as possible in the discussions, and after the formation of the commission, which I assume will take place in the fall, we hope to have meetings with ethno-cultural organizations throughout the province and possibly other Albertans who are interested in furthering our cultural heritage.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, again to the Minister of Culture. The Cultural Heritage Council has provided yeoman service to this province over the years, and can the minister advise this Assembly of the status of the Council as a result of these new initiatives?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Council will maintain its very important position in terms of advising the government as to ways in which we can enhance our cultural heritage. In fact, its position will be enhanced considerably through the establishment of the commission proposed in legislation for this House, which will have the chairperson of that council sit as a commissioner and govern the direction that we'll take province-wide with our cultural heritage programs in the province.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. In light of the current budget restraints, could the minister advise this Assembly where the dollars are going to come from for these new initiatives, and how much will it cost Albertans today?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the Multicultural Resource Development Institute, that consists of dollars which are in this year's budget from Alberta Culture, as well as money we've been able to have committed from the federal government. In terms of the establishment of the commission, which will bring together the Cultural Heritage Foundation and the Cultural Heritage Division of the department, we will depend on the monies allocated in this budget year to the Department of Culture, as well as the lottery monies which have traditionally gone to the Cultural Heritage Foundation. There are not new allocations in that respect, but we believe that the combination of the two will lead to both efficiency and to the enhanced ability to bring cultural heritage programs and cultural heritage directions to the people of Alberta.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By just following on that same point to the Minister, by making this commission dependent on the Treasurer's budget for funds as well as through lottery funds, the arrangement for the current foundation, the Commission becomes an even less of an arm's length organization. If the Minister wants to make multiculturalism a priority in this government, why is the Multicultural Commission given less status than the culture side of his portfolio?
Mr. Speaker, contrary to the suggestion by the honourable member, the Commission elevates the issue of multiculturalism, the concerns about cultural heritage, to a level unprecedented in Canada. And the chairman of that commission will be a member of this legislature who will be able to bring concerns, ideas, and new directions directly to the Assembly for discussion purposes. Indeed, there's no other government in the nation who's taken such a dramatic step for the cultural heritage of this nation, in particular for Alberta.
Edmonton Highlands.
Question, Mr. Speaker. I see the minister has no difficulty in finding reallocated money for his pet projects. Therefore, I wonder if he will outline what steps he's taken since I spoke to him privately last week to ensure that the very few jobs needed to keep the Discovering Multiculturalism program, that is for immigrant children, alive and perpetuated through this summer.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to that particular project, the honourable member spoke to me regarding the step positions which might be utilized for that. As the Minister of Employment and Career Development had indicated previously, discussions are underway regarding whether or not further funds can be allocated to the STEP program.
Member for Edmonton Beverley, followed by Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this afternoon are to the Minister of Labour. It is regarding the minimum wage. At $3.80 an hour, Alberta has the lowest minimum wage in Canada and is in fact 20 cents lower than the lowest minimum and $1.20 lower or below the highest rate in Canada. As well, Alberta has the oldest unchallenged or unchanged minimum wage. It hasn't been changed since 1981. That's been 6 years since we've had an adjustment upwards in the minimum wage. To the Minister, is the Minister aware that a single person living in the province of Alberta earning a minimum wage would actually be living $2,000 a year less than the poverty line figure in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would read the copy of the final report of the Labour Legislation Review Committee, he would see some recommendations in there regarding a review of the minimum wage. He'll have to wait until the legislation is tabled in the legislature for some follow-up to that. I think to refer to the Alberta minimum wage at this time, one has to remember that, as well as the fact that it has not been adjusted during the last 6 years, there have been many other people in Alberta who have not had much increase in their incomes during that period of time. That is not the result of the attitudes of this government, but of a government in Ottawa that was supported by the party to which the honourable member belongs. The situation about the minimum wage, it is true that it is less than the so-called poverty line. I won't get into that discussion, in spite of the temptation to get into debate instigated by the honourable member.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while the Minister may suggest that we have to wait till the labour laws are changed, I suggest to him that that amendment can be made very quickly. Indeed, I suspect he could do it tomorrow. And certainly, while there has been it's been 6 years since there's been a change, other people have indeed received some adjustments in their wages upwards, including members of this Assembly. Further to the Minister, perhaps he'll probably respond in the same way, but another actually horror story is that a family...
Honourable Member, we're now into the third sentence on the supplementary. Please continue, but with the question.
Well, is the Minister aware that an average family of 2 parents and 2 children trying to survive on one minimum wage income would be doing less than, or would be below $12,000 below the poverty line in this province?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we could all find individual examples like that. As I've said before, a large percentage of those who are earning the minimum wage are young people starting in the workforce, indeed obtaining their first experience of being in the workforce. Others are second or third incomes into the family, and many are indeed part-time workers. On that basis, I don't think that one can base the minimum wage upon people's requirements, but upon what the work is worth and upon its economic value. If one was to place the minimum wage at a certain level, that might well give everybody the chance of buying a house or a Cadillac, that might price the work right out of the workplace. As a result, Mr. Speaker, one has to bear in mind economic realities, something that the particular party to which the member belongs is prone to ignore.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, is the Minister not concerned that the fastest growing sector in Alberta's economy is sales and services? is an area that's characterized by a minimum wage jobs, which of course explains in part the fact that 2/3 of Alberta's minimum wage earners are women, many of whom had single parent families. Is the minister not concerned?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member continues to invite debate, and I shall resist it. On the other hand, to make the extrapolations that he just made, I am sure he doesn't have statistics to indicate that everyone in the service sector in Alberta is working at the minimum wage.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary then. Will the minister today offer this pledge to the Assembly that Alberta's minimum wage will be adjusted upward, at least the national average, not the highest, just the national average, roughly $4.25 an hour before Canada Day of this year?
Mr. Speaker, I will not give the honourable member that assurance. I will give him the assurance that the minimum wage will be thoroughly reviewed. It will be discussed thoroughly in relation to the economic status of those who work at the minimum wage, but also will bear in mind the type of work that is done and the ability of the employers to pay wages. This government is sympathetic to those who are indeed low-wage earners. But on the other hand, once more, they don't like to hear the truth, Mr. Speaker. The situation is that that review will be a thorough one, and the honourable member will have to await the results of that review.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I think the House is well aware that time means nothing to the minister. This could go on for years. Would the minister care to inform the House what deadline he has imposed on the preview when he will be telling the House the results of his study?
I just answered that question.
Calgary-McCall, followed by Littlebow.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour, considering the economic times in Alberta, would the minister agree that now is not the time to initiate higher minimum wages, which could have a further negative impact to small business and jobs in the province, as well as a start of another inflation spiral?
Mr. Speaker, I won't give the honourable member that assurance either. As I said, the review will be thorough and will be based on a thorough assessment. It may well indicate an increase in the minimum wage is indicated. If so, it will be implemented.
Member for supplementary. All right.
Mr. I read in the press that there are people striking that could receive $15 an hour in terms of wages. Could the minister indicate whether there's any reason why a person receiving minimum wage can't leave that job and go to another wage at their own free will?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member brings up an interesting point. It is true that there are highly skilled tradesmen who are currently on strike to resist the wage that has been offered by the employers. Those are extremely highly skilled.
Order, please, Honourable Minister. Enough back chat is going on in the chamber. The chair, in spite of my advancing years, is having difficulty to listen. Perhaps Honourable Minister could continue.
Socialists don't want to hear you, Ian.
Those on strike are, as I said, highly skilled tradesmen, and it may well be that their demand is justified. It's up to them to negotiate with the employers who may feel that their ability to pay is somewhat restricted. Certainly, most of those on the minimum wage would be completely incapable of performing that work.
Member for Lethbridge West, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer, and it relates to the Alberta capital bonds that the Minister announced yesterday. Could the Provincial Treasurer indicate to the House the amount that the Alberta government would hope to raise by this issue of the Alberta capital bond?
Mr. Speaker, we have not assigned any dollar amount to the amount of money which will be raised under this new bond issue. I should say, however, that it's unlikely we would cut off any unsubscribed requests for the bond issue. And I would imagine, Mr. Speaker, that on a general sense, we'll be looking at the order of at least $50 million.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I'm very confident Albertans will want to invest in Alberta capital bonds. With regard to the interest rates, which I understand will be announced a week tomorrow, can the Minister indicate to the Assembly if those rates will be determined based on such factors as the Canada Savings Bond current rate, Treasury bills, and guaranteed income certificates, or is there some unique formula that the provincial treasurer is looking at?
Well, the Ouija board. Mr. Speaker, we don't intend to be competing with any other investment instruments which now are popularly used in the province of Alberta, including the ones mentioned, Canada Savings Bonds or Guaranteed Investment Certificates. We believe that this is unique enough, Mr. Speaker, to be attractive on its own merits. Nonetheless, one must be price conscious when you set the interest rates for these investments, and we will attempt to price it as close to certain instruments as possible. Likely we would look at the price of Dominion of Canada Treasury bills moving 2 to 3 year period, or perhaps even the guaranteed investment certificates that the member talked about. But nonetheless, because of the uncertainty in interest rates right now in all markets, we will watch it very carefully as we move through to the period May 15th. But no, Mr. Speaker, I don't have any particular formula I will use. It will simply be driven by the marketplace.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, as the Treasurer indicates in the material that the money is to be used for long-term projects such as universities, colleges, and so on, which by implication means long-term use by the citizens, could the Treasurer indicate if it's the intent of this government to offer these capital bonds on an annual basis to the people of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, we haven't come to that conclusion yet. Obviously, we will sense and measure the response we have on this particular issue. And should it be a popular vehicle, we will then consider bringing it forward next year as well, Mr. Speaker.
A final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Inasmuch as these bonds being offered to Alberta are unique in Canada, in that corporations and societies may purchase them, it's a real first for Canada. Could the Treasurer advise the Assembly whether or not the government is giving consideration in using the Alberta portion of the income tax system in the form of a rebate in such a manner as to increase the effective yield to the citizens of Alberta who purchase these bonds?
Mr. Speaker, that has been recommended to me on several occasions that we could use the tax system to provide some kind of tax credit or tax exempt status. Presently, under the tax legislation, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all members are aware that the first $1,000 of income in any event is not taxable, or at least it's deducted from calculation of taxable income. And so in that sense, obviously, approximately under the current rates, $12,000 could be acquired without really attracting any additional or marginal tax. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't think we should move in the direction of making any promises that these would be tax exempt or tax deductible, except for the current provisions, because, of course, as we talked earlier in this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, we are in the process now of reviewing tax reform itself, and the current intentions are to broaden that tax base as wide as possible, eliminating as many deductions as possible, and reducing the marginal rates. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it would be somewhat improper for us to suggest that we would use a tax system to encourage investment. We believe the strength of this issue will be found both in the need and the objectives of betting on the future of this province and the fact that they're guaranteed by the province itself and the interest rate, Mr. Speaker. Those seem to be the elements, and I think that all Albertans will be called upon to invest in the future of this province, and I hope that that happens.
Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Edmonton Glengarry. Supplementary, Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the provincial treasurer, having read the literature he distributed in the House yesterday with interest, I note that the new bonds will be encashable on a 6-month basis, but that the interest offered through this program is simple interest as opposed to compounded interest. I'm sure that there's going to be public money invested in launching this program. To ensure its success, that is to ensure that people will take out these bonds, will the provincial treasurer now reconsider the entire package and offer compounded interest to guarantee that people in fact will choose this over some other investment which wouldn't be coming into Alberta?
I'm just trying to sort out what you said, but I'm not too sure, Mr. Speaker, the member knows the difference between compound and simple interest in any event, but let me say, Mr. Speaker, that there will be no need to compound the interest because on an annual basis it will be paid out. And therefore, the owner of the bond obviously will receive a check from the province of Alberta at the end of each year and they will have the money to invest. And so by their own investment process, it will be compounding by their own choice, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it will be simple. What should be noted, Mr. Speaker, however, is if it's necessary to redeem the bonds at the end of a 6-month period, par value or the full face value of the bond will be repaid, plus any interest which has been accrued on a simple basis since the date of issue to the 6-month period. Mr. Speaker, that's probably one of the best deals in Canada right now in terms of that investment vehicle.
Time for question period has expired. Mike, is the House willing to give unanimous consent to recognize the next speaker, Edmonton Meadowlark? Opposed? This set of questions, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you. It is on this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the House. In fact, it's very fortunate that the legislature, the government allowed me to continue, because I'm actually going to congratulate the Treasurer on this enlightened savings bond issue. It is a very positive way for Albertans to be encouraged to invest in this province. Having said that, however, I would like to question certain concerns we have about the way that the money might be directed. Why is it that the Treasurer has pegged this money for more capital construction, which only creates long-term operating obligations?
Mr. Speaker, before the Assembly right now, we have a very elaborate capital projects division and a capital fund as well, Mr. Speaker, and over the course of the next few days we'll be debating that capital fund. But in the proposal which we put forward in this Assembly in the budget speech itself, Mr. Speaker, we provided clearly for a construction program in the capital fund, and that capital fund includes universities, hospitals, and a water diversion project or water storage projects in southern Alberta. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we have made the commitment already to go ahead with those projects. The problem we face, of course, is raising money to fund them. Now, it seems appropriate to me, Mr. Speaker, that we give the citizens of Alberta an opportunity to invest in those long-term projects, which are significant public works for this province, and to allow the benefits of the investment in those projects both to accrue to the second and third generations who will come behind us, but also, Mr. Speaker, to receive the income benefit from those bonds as well. So it's not a question of driving the decision on the source of funds. It's a question of decision having been made and now a need to find the source of funds.
Would the fear is, of course, that this is going to be some kind of special pool. Could the Treasurer please confirm that this will not be a special pool of funds for excess or extra expenditure or a slush fund that is being...
Order, Honourable Member. There's confusion in the House, and it's been caused in part by the Chair. The Chair reads the consent of the House as being to allow the continuation and completion of that series of questions which had been raised, and therefore your Chair recognizes that Edmonton Meadowlark was only entitled to the one question today. Sorry. Orders of the day.